Just 3 days following my disappearance, I possessed film of Vanessa's first overnight stay. I possessed records of their delivery of food, wine, and takeout. There was proof of her disregard for the marriage and abandoning of marital property before the legal separation ever happened. I had time-stamped images of them kissing in the driveway and arriving and leaving together at hours that made it plain she wasn't just visiting. Proof that would shortly prove to be useful. The true turn of events occurred 6 months ago, when managing partner Daniel was overlooked. Eliza Chambers, a master strategist with an unblemished record, was appointed to the role. Assuming he had been wrongfully taken of anything, Daniel had been enraged. I would later learn that he started spending carelessly on a new car, tailored outfits, and extravagant gifts for both himself and Vanessa. I had been keeping careful tabs on our funds, unbeknownst to Daniel. My own accounts, which he was unaware of, continued to grow in size while our combined ones shrank. In his pursuit of proving himself deserving of the post, I watched as he made investments that were more riskier. I chose to remain silent, letting him think I was still the trusting, naive wife who believed in his financial expertise, even if he had lost. I had always been the breadwinner in our marriage, but Daniel had no idea that would remain the case. I had always had a better salary and had always been more cautious with my investments, but in the end I had made more money. My savings plus the money I received from my grandmother's estate went toward the down payment and improvements of our property. I knew it was crucial for Daniel to think of himself as the main provider, so I kept these things under wraps. Sarah sent me another text and my phone beeped. I just spoke with Marcus on the phone. According to him, after that PR disaster, several significant clients pulled out of Daniel's investment group, and now they're in deep trouble. The PR fiasco was well known to me. Inflated returns and stolen money were part of a plot that Preston and Blackwell were caught up in. Although Daniel was not personally involved, the scandal tarnished the reputation of the entire firm. Their stock was falling precipitously, customers were running for the hills, and Daniel's investments, which were tightly linked to the firm's success, were also falling precipitously, which accounted for his escalating desperation. I'd seen substantial transfers out of our shared savings account, with funds going into risky investments. Daniel thought he could get out of his jam by gambling, but I had already secured most of our assets. I sipped the last of my tea and generously tipped Jenny. My strategy had to get to the next level. One last glance at the home passed me as I made my way to my car. Not the flashy SUV Daniel knew, but a plain sedan I'd bought through a shell company months before. This is our home. The dwelling I own. Daniel and Vanessa were planning to go to his family's lake cottage for a romantic weekend getaway, and they would depart tomorrow. On Sunday night, they would return to discover the locks changed, an inoperable security system, and legal notices affixed to the door. But that was for tomorrow. After having dinner with Sarah tonight, I met with my legal team to finalize our plans. The last act was drawing near, and every second counted. I looked in the mirror at the posh restaurant where Sarah was waiting and saw that I looked calm, assured, and perfectly put together. I didn't look like a woman whose marriage was falling apart. My meticulously maintained facade belied a planned wrath, but no one could tell. As I settled into the booth across from Sarah, she saw that you appeared remarkably composed. Impressed or worried? I can't make up my mind. My response was, be impressed, as I took the glass of Cabernet that she had purchased for me. So far, everything has gone according to plan. Sarah lowered her voice and leaned forward. Did you just say that you're absolutely sure the house is yours? Could he not find any way around this? Without a doubt. This is solely a deed in my name. The down payment was made from a separate account of mine. Through my personal accounts, I took care of all the property taxes. Not a single document pertaining to ownership bears Daniel's name. And this deal was unquestioned by him. I gave in to it. A subtle grin. From the beginning, Daniel cared more about how things looked than how they really were. He never bothered to check the legal owner's name on the deed as long as he could brag about our house at dinner parties. With a mix of amusement and horror, Sarah shook her head. Guys like Daniel never anticipate the arrival of ladies like you, do they? I looked over the menu and said, That's what makes this possible, even though I had already decided what to eat. Even as an ally and later as an adversary, he failed to recognize my full potential. Our server was about to come over, and everyone stopped talking. We continued to act like two friends having a laid-back supper as we placed our orders. Sarah took out her iPad and put it into business mode as soon as we were alone again. She claimed that she had gone over every piece of paperwork from the forensic accountants. For the last 8 months, Daniel has been methodically transferring funds from your combined accounts into separate ones. Some of it went on Vanessa's presents, jewelry, and weekend trips. However, it seems like most of it is an effort to protect assets in case of a divorce. I didn't begrudge it. This works out wonderfully for us. Divorce courts frown upon the practice of concealing marital assets. Sarah continued, her face contorted into a countenance of gloom. Concerning the stability of the firm, he has been deceiving. The federal government is looking into Preston and Blackwell. Within weeks, there will be rumors of indictments. Particularly susceptible is Daniel's situation. Despite the novelty of the data, I decided not to alter my approach. My timetable was actually sped up as a result. Now that he's even more frantic, Daniel is more prone to making blunders. Could it be that he's about to lose everything, which is why he moved Vanessa in so fast? Sarah, she inquired, creating an alternate strategy. I thought about this while maybe sipping a small glass of wine. Maybe he really thinks I'll never return. It shows his character or lack thereof either way. With the efficiency of 2 professionals used to working lunches and strategic dinners, our meal arrived and we ate. While munching on our food, we worked out the specifics for the upcoming week. Tomorrow afternoon the locksmith is due to arrive. Meredith has put the security crew on standby. What about the belongings you still have at home? With a signal for the check, Sarah inquired. What would happen to them if anything were to happen to them? I reassured her that all things of genuine worth, whether monetary or emotional, had already been taken care of. What on earth? What little remains can be easily replaced or deliberately left behind? More importantly, we have photographic proof and a comprehensive inventory of all the belongings in that house. Even a single item going missing would be a huge win for us. A look of both adoration and anxiety crossed Sarah's face as she regarded me. You've considered every possible scenario, haven't you? A simple, I've had years to prepare was my response. Later that night, I examined tomorrow's last preparations in my temporary apartment, a modern, minimalist room in a safe downtown building. Via the time Daniel and Vanessa were confirmed to be well on their way to the lake house via surveillance, the locksmith had already been confirmed for 2 p.m. In order to install the new system, the security team would arrive at 2:30 and stay on site until Sunday evening. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Meredith would make sure that everything was correctly documented and send the legal notices. Once again, I was unprepared for the necessity of the tracking program I had installed on Daniel's phone months ago, so I retrieved my laptop and reviewed it. As far as the dot can tell, he was at my house, our house, getting ready to spend the night with Vanessa. They would joyfully prepare for their weekend retreat tomorrow morning, completely oblivious to the surprises that awaited them when they got back. There was no longer any melancholy, remorse, or wrath as I got ready for bed. Those feelings had long since faded, replaced by a stony resolve. The decisions had been made by Daniel. The time had come for him to deal with the fallout. A final message from Meredith rang my phone. All set for tomorrow. One final opportunity to reevaluate strategy. Traditional choices are still accessible. Without hesitating, I wrote out my reply. Continue as scheduled. They merit a weekend of illusionary safety before the real world sets in. Putting down my phone, I stumbled. Laying down on the cool sheets, I shut my eyes. For Daniel, his cozy delusions will finally come crashing down tomorrow. Next week at this time, he would know precisely who he had betrayed. She wasn't the submissive, encouraging wife he'd imagined, but rather someone who had planned for his every move. A woman who rightfully belonged to the land he was standing on and was preparing to claim it back. The arrival of morning was as clear as my mood. I got up early, did my regular workout, and was extra careful with my clothing. A sharp black suit that exuded power, pearls that belonged to my grandma, and light makeup that emphasized rather than hidden. No need to get aggressive today. My squad would have left the house before Daniel and Vanessa ever got there. Today was all about getting ready, about laying the groundwork for Sunday's revelation. A message from my surveillance contact rang my phone. They are currently packing the car. Expected to take off in about half an hour. Timing. Instead of going home, I packed up my necessities and made my way to Meredith's office for our farewell briefing. Driving, I couldn't help but imagine the horror on Daniel and Vanessa's faces when they got home from their romantic weekend, only to find themselves locked out and served with court summons demanding their permanent and immediate departure from my property. As I got on the freeway and headed toward the next phase of my meticulously planned strategy, the thought made me smile a little. A glittering downtown high-rise, all steel and glass and frightening professionalism, housed Meredith's office on the 15th story. Harper, Chen and Associates' reception room was minimalist in design, with well-placed lighting and no photos or personal touches whatsoever. No one here specialized in helping people get a peaceful divorce or separation. When a surgical approach to legal warfare was required, this was the place to go. Right on schedule, Claire Meredith came out of her corner office to greet me. Her grin was sincere but controlled, and her handshake was strong. Meredith Harper became known as the most terrifying divorce attorney in 3 counties by the time she was 52 years old. Infidelity, financial deceit, and abandonment were her areas of expertise in situations involving serious marital wrongdoing. Her merciless efficiency was praised by clients like myself, while judges revered and dreaded her. That is correct. While escorting me to her office, she informed me that I had just arrived. They left the house around 12 minutes ago, your husband and his friend. As predicted, our surveillance shows that they are making their way toward the lake house. I didn't begrudge it. Predictability was Daniel's strong suit. Something that had brought some solace at first, but which had now made everything seem too simple. Visual organ. While we were seated at her conference table, Meredith began by consulting her tablet and saying that the locksmith's appointment was at 2 o'clock. At 2:30 the security team will arrive, and at 3 I will personally deliver the notices. Her head cocked upward. Are you really positive that you do not wish to be there? Absolutely, I responded. Being here would just lead to a confrontation. The legal papers should do the talking. Meredith gave a knowing nod. Clients who understood strategy rather than emotion were appreciated by her. We should go over the instructions again now. Several folders, each labeled with painstaking precision, were strewn out across the table by her. Documentation of financial affairs of the spouse, abandonment of marital assets, and property deeds. We meticulously reviewed each folder for the next hour, checking that all documents were in the correct format, photos were dated and legitimate, and financial records were confirmed. Our case wasn't merely about getting my house back. This was all in an effort to make sure Daniel would be unable to challenge any part of the divorce settlement I would propose. As Meredith made a brief note on her legal pad, she mentioned that the judge assigned to your case is Crawford. When it comes to financial deceit, she has even less tolerance for infidelity. There will be repercussions for Daniel if he moves his girlfriend into the marital home so soon after your absence without reporting you missing. What about the Denton case? I inquired, alluding to the separate probe we had hired to look into the financial woes of Preston and Blackwell. Across the table, Meredith slipped yet another folder. A new day has begun. The SEC's probe is picking up speed. We have already sent target letters to 3 of our key partners. Although Daniel is not yet one of them, his department is. I skimmed the report, making mental notes of the clients who had already pulled their money out, the particular transactions under investigation, and the expected timing for possible indictments. Daniel had no clue that I was aware that his work life was crumbling all around him. What is the window of opportunity for him before word gets out? I inquired. Meredith said it would be 2 weeks, no more than 3. The stock price of the company will fall much more after it breaks. The value of any investments linked to their money will be minimal at best. I closed the folder, adding another piece to my puzzle about Daniel's conduct lately. That clarifies why last month we had to suddenly sell off our joint investments. He's making an effort to avoid the collision. According to Meredith, transferring assets prior to a divorce petition is already a major headache. It is more worse to transfer them when you are aware that federal securities charges are underway. Over the last 6 weeks, our forensic accountant has traced 3 distinct transfers to accounts in foreign countries. Should we assume Daniel was aware of the probe prior to making those transfers? Meredith grinned a little, contentedly. From February 12th, his personal email was sent to Vanessa. The SEC is reportedly investigating Fletcher's department. You better get moving before things goes off the rails. My eyebrow was arched. Are you able to view his private email correspondence? Say what you will about Vanessa's cloud. Despite having access to potentially sensitive financial information, Meredith responded with professional detachment, saying that storage security is much less than it should be. Furthermore, she ought to be aware better than to conduct personal communications on her work computer. We had completed all of the necessary preparations by lunchtime. Confirmation was given to the security crew and locksmith. An exhaustive inventory of all belongings in the residence was revised one more time, and the necessary legal notices were written and notarized. When they get back on Sunday and discover they're locked out, what will happen? Despite knowing the answer beforehand, I inquired nonetheless. Evidently they will contact you, Meredith responded. They will find out about the new security system and the legal notices when they call a locksmith themselves when that fails. Any effort to access the property without your explicit consent would be considered trespassing, as stated clearly in the signage. His legal situation is very precarious because the deed is exclusively in your name and there is documentation of Daniel moving another woman into the property. Without hesitation, I made the observation that he will be enraged, but anger does not alter the factual situation in a court of law. After collecting the folders, Meredith put them back in her safe. In case he decides to test the boundaries, we have arranged for a security team to monitor the property from Sunday evening through Monday morning. Just after we wrapped up our meeting, the monitoring team texted me. Everyone is clear at the main residence as subjects arrive to Lake House at 11:42 a.m. I told Meredith that everything is proceeding according to plan. At last, they've arrived at the Lake House. With a nod, she escorted me to the front of her office. I will contact you later this afternoon once all of the tasks are finished. For the time being, I recommend that you carry on with your day as scheduled. It is recommended to build regular behavioral routines. Lunch with the hospital and board chairman was on the agenda for today, as was a meeting with the underwriters of our new expansion project. The fact was that I was temporarily changing my address, but everyone at work thought I was just going through a trial separation, so they didn't ask any probing questions or feel sorry for me. Upon exiting Meredith's building, an unusual sense of lightness washed over me, as if I had let go of a long-suppressed load. I had, in many respects, keeping up appearances of marital happiness while carrying the heavy burden of Daniel's treachery. The old tangled web of legal process and financial disentanglement was giving way to the new, crisp lines. By the time I got to my car, my phone had buzzed again. Sarah was the one this time. Will lunch be at 1:30? Find out what's happening with Dee at work. I quickly confirmed by text message. Sarah's connections in the legal department of the hospital were a great asset to the information networks I was already using. Every time she updated, it was helpful. Sarah had gone for an intentionally laid-back eatery. Nestled in the heart of the city's arts area, this farm-to-table cafe is sandwiched between a bookstore and a boutique florist. Since Daniel and his co-workers wouldn't normally hang out there, it served our goals admirably. Sarah was already sitting at a corner table when I arrived. She had swapped out her usual court clothes for weekend casual, but even that exuded an air of refined taste that betrayed her meticulous taste in clothing. As I took my seat, she noticed that, for someone who is in the midst of ending her marriage, you were unusually calm. Thought it was more like rearranging my life, I said as I took the menu from the waitress. Sarah leaned forward, and her voice grew quieter as soon as we placed our orders. My financial crime section contact contacted me this morning, as you are aware, Richards. Now that their inquiry has broadened, Preston and Blackwell are considering RICO allegations. With care, I placed my water glass on the table. Sex trafficking. It's a bigger deal than we anticipated. For certain very wealthy clients, it seems that some of the senior partners were operating what is essentially a Ponzi scheme. A stunning collapse is taking place in the House of Cards. Sarah looked downcast. Some of these unique accounts were being managed by Daniel's division. Something wasn't right, even if he wasn't the one who came up with the plan. This made things more complicated, which may be a good thing. In my opinion, Daniel's capacity to challenge our divorce or claim any of my assets would be severely limited if he were to face criminal charges. Where am I in the schedule? I inquired. Prosecutors are expected to file indictments within the next month, once the grand jury meets next week. For a brief moment, our dinner came, which halted the discussion. I pondered the ramifications of this fresh knowledge while we dined. Not only was Daniel about to lose his house and his marriage, but he might also face criminal accusations, shame in his career, and financial collapse. A typical individual could feel some pity or lingering worry for a man they'd been married to for 12 years. No answers came up as I looked deep inside. Both in his professional and personal life, Daniel had made decisions without giving any thought to the potential outcomes. I didn't feel obligated to protect him from those repercussions, even though they were on their way. Is there any update on Vanessa's role? As I speared a forkful of salad, I inquired. When Sarah heard this, she shook her head in denial. Our best guess is that she is only the executive assistant who dated him. There is no evidence that she is connected to the financial matters, despite a pause. Regardless of what, something intriguing was brought up by Richards. According to reports, 3 years earlier, Vanessa worked for Meridian Capital, another company that was the subject of an inquiry. The scandal erupted just as she was about to leave. Was it just a coincidence? For the sake of my own research, I have saved this data. It was not apparent if Vanessa was caught up in the plans of powerful corrupt guys or if she was just attracted to them. Regardless, she had tacked on the incorrect horse to her cart this time. Can you tell me when the locksmith will be there? Sarah changed the subject and asked. The time is 2 in the afternoon. All tasks should be finished by the end of the day. Sarah drank her iced tea while she watched me. So, you're essentially going to let them back into a locked residence without any prior notice. Is there no dialogue? Which topic of discussion would you recommend? I retaliated. Greetings, Daniel. I wanted you to know that the house you and your girlfriend moved into is actually mine, and that you and your girlfriend need to leave right now. Sarah smiled slightly and conceded when you phrased it that way. This method conveys a more direct message, I went on to say. No matter how cunning Daniel thought his play was, I was always one step ahead of him, and he had no idea how I was going to counter it. Just so I don't cross paths with you, Sarah half-jokingly said. After I had my lunch, I headed to my temporary apartment to get ready for what was to happen later that afternoon. I was notified that the locksmith was on his way to the residence at exactly 1:45 p.m. The first images, showing the installation of the new deadbolts and the destruction of the old keys, arrived on my secure server around 2:10 p.m. The new system, which required biometric confirmation in addition to a code, had been installed by the security team by 2.40. The only approved access points were previously programmed in using my fingerprints and retinal scan. A text message from Meredith read, "Notices posted on all entries at 3:05. Hard copies were mailed to Dee's office and an electronic copy was provided to his email. Verification of security. Setup finished. Protected property." I let out a breath that I had been holding for no apparent reason. It was finished. My home was physically and legally regained. It was time to wait. During this break, I got down to brass tacks by going over the hospital's quarterly financial predictions, making notes for the budget meeting on Monday, and responding to the mountain of work emails that had built up over the previous few days. I consciously refrained from viewing the residence or Daniel's location surveillance feeds. Up until Sunday night, there was absolutely nothing to see. That evening, I indulged in a rare treat for myself by ordering takeout from my go-to sushi joint, uncorking a bottle of premium sake I'd been hoarding, and finally watching a film I'd been meaning to see for. The real showdown had yet to occur, so we celebrated the minor victories along the way. Unexpected calmness greeted Sunday. My day began with a yoga session, and then I had breakfast with a college pal who had no idea that I was married. The return to routine was invigorating since it served as a reminder that the drama in my own life was not the only one going on in the world. But by late afternoon, my attention was once again focused on the imminent showdown. Daniel and Vanessa departed the lake house at 3:17 p.m., as indicated by the tracking data. Depending on their usual driving time, they would usually return home between 5:30 and 6 o'clock in the evening. I was notified at 5:15 that the security detail had arrived, with unmarked vehicles positioned at key intersections offering unobstructed views of the property's entrances. They were told to keep an eye out and make notes, but to only step in if they saw someone trying to force their way into the residence or if the scenario got violent. The alert I had been anticipating, the subject's vehicle was entering the neighborhood, came at 5:42. I will arrive at the property in about 3 minutes. With the iPad resting on the desk and the live feeds from the security cameras installed around my house, I found a comfortable seat in my home office and settled in. It was possible to see the driveway, front entry, rear door, and side gate on separate screens. There was complete stillness. For the time being, the Mercedes driven by Daniel pulled into the driveway at 5:46. Unaware of what lay ahead, I observed him and Vanessa get out of the car and start laughing about something. Daniel escorted them to the front entrance as they removed their weekend luggage from the trunk. When his key wouldn't turn in the lock, it was the first sign of disaster. I saw his bewilderment, his futile attempts, and his mounting annoyance. Vanessa made a gesture toward the door and said a word. This time Daniel made a stronger effort. At last, he took a step back, visibly frustrated as he ran his fingers through his hair. The legal notification was clearly visible on the door, as Vanessa pointed out. Taking it off, Daniel brought it closer to read in the dimming twilight light. Without sound I could still make out his reaction. First bewilderment, then incredulity, and finally wrath. After folding and tossing the notice to the ground he, after bringing out his phone, picked it back up. His caller ID was crystal clear to me. My phone started ringing right on time. On the screen, Daniel's name and picture showed up. It went to my voicemail. I saw him post a third angry message in as many minutes on the security stream. Like you, Vanessa was probably researching what to do if you get locked out of your house or hiring a locksmith. After a short while, the anticipated message came. Please tell me what is happening. They changed the locks for what reason? Dial my number right now. I remained silent. The legal notices have already expressed everything that needed to be said. It was easy to guess what Daniel would do next. Despite his best efforts, he and Vanessa were unable to open the back door because it was also protected with a legal notice. Tight shoulders, clenched fists, and an aggressive posture were all signs of his growing fury. He had already picked up his phone upon his return to the front yard, most likely to contact a locksmith. I was quite aware of the trajectory the discussion would take. Every single locksmith in the area was aware of the security mechanism we had set up. After verifying the address through their system and discovering the legal hold, any respectable business would turn down the job. Indeed, my guess was validated by Daniel's expression. His request had obviously been turned down by whomever he was chatting with. With a clear expression of rage, he abruptly disconnected the call and then proceeded to ring again. The outcome was the same based on his response. As the evening air grew cooler, Vanessa embraced herself, seemingly becoming increasingly uneasy. After she muttered something to Daniel, he retaliated by snapping at her before trying to reach me in vain again. After 10 unsuccessful attempts at reaching his number, Daniel escalated to banging on the door and yelling. An update was texted by the security team. Problem is getting out of hand. Someone in the neighborhood has noticed. Reserves ready to step in if called upon. Retain your positions until there is bodily harm or property damage, I texted back. It seems like Daniel had a flash of inspiration right as I sent this directive. Looking for what appeared to be a tire iron, he went back to his car and searched the trunk. My pulse rate accelerated somewhat. Was he seriously planning to attempt a break-in? But before that, he could get close to the home. As it got closer to my property, a police cruiser slowed and turned onto the street. It seems like one of the nearby residents reported an annoyance. Just right. While Daniel remained gripping the tire iron, the police officers advanced at him. I overheard Daniel making a lot of frantic gestures toward the house as he seemed to be claiming it as his own throughout their brief exchange. While one officer read the legal notice, the other probably ran the address through property records by speaking into his radio. The meeting concluded just as I had expected. The cops made it very obvious to Daniel that the property was registered in my name alone, that the legal notices were genuine, and that trespassing would be a criminal offense if he tried to enter without permission. They told him to get his car out of the driveway and to go. Even on the tiny screen, Daniel's wrath was visible. His red cheeks, aggressive posture, and pointing of fingers. But his fury had little effect on uniformed officers who possessed transparent property records. At last, he returned to his car in a huff, with Vanessa chasing after him, their weekend luggage in tow. I got the last text message from the security detail as they were driving away. Individuals leaving the venue. Still need to file incident report, officers. I have all the papers. I put my phone down and relaxed in my chair, taking deep breaths. Step 1 is finished. This time it was Meredith who buzzed my phone. The police have been notified. First responders verified. Service of legal notices completed. No changes to the security detail for tonight, per the original plan. You did a great job, Claire. I felt a pleasant surprise when I read the last words. From the painstaking recording of Daniel's adultery to the well-planned time of my abduction, from the close observation of his financial moves to today's recovery of my possessions, everything had been performed with precision. I calculated every step. Every response was expected. Next, I was prepared. After reorganizing and consulting with legal counsel, Daniel would try to launch a counteroffensive. After reviewing the property deed, the proof of adultery, the recorded financial lies, and now the police report about his alleged attempt to enter my house armed, he would realize that his choices were extremely restricted. But that was the fight for tomorrow. Knowing that Daniel and Vanessa were frantically looking for lodgings would allow me to sleep soundly tonight. Their once romantic weekend fell apart. Their safety net shattered. Just one more ding from my phone. This is Daniel's last-ditch effort. A text message. During the night. This will not go unpunished. The challenges you face are completely unknown to you. I also own this house. His predicted bombast made me grin slightly. How naive he was. I couldn't believe he had no idea what I was capable of or the foundation I had painstakingly laid for years. Prior to our attorney's formal meeting, I would simply respond with a single typed message. Make sure. The title to the land. Hey there, Daniel. Nothing ever belonged to you. Subsequently, I disconnected from my phone, poured a glass of wine, and prepared to spend an evening in solitude. The following day would offer fresh difficulties and tactics to try. But I enjoyed this very much tonight. A minor win, the initial public action in a months-long covert plot. I had always been disregarded by Daniel. Once this was ended, he would make sure he didn't do that again. We got the promised deluge first thing in the morning. Daniel made 16 unsuccessful phone calls. A total of 28 text messages, including accusations, pleads, and threats. There were 3 voicemails, and the volume and lack of coherence grew each time. And most crucially, Meredith had updates. Overnight, Daniel had phoned 3 different legal firms. 2 of them had politely rejected to represent him following first investigation into the property records. Thirdly, a consultation was set for 9 a.m. with the notoriously aggressive litigation firm Goldstein and Palmer. Sarah was notified of this and got back to me right away. For members of the hospital board are at odds with GNP. They will treat him like radioactive waste when I call. Before turning it down, I gave this alternative some thought. He can fritter away his money on pointless consultations. Still more proof of bad judgment. Daniel left an irate message on my workplace voicemail, requesting that I call him right away to clear this confusion. Accessible through backdoor methods. His corporate email revealed panicked messages to co-workers requesting referrals to real estate lawyers and short-term housing alternatives. An interaction with his immediate supervisor was very illuminating. Kindly grant me immediate personal leave. Urgent attention is needed on a family matter. Undoubtedly, Daniel had hoped for a different kind of answer. Thank you for notifying us. Just a heads up, the executive committee meeting is scheduled for 10 a.m. concerning the results of the audit conducted by the relevant department. It is imperative that you be present. Just as I had intended, Daniel's world was crumbling on many fronts at once. He would be staring down the barrel of losing his house, marriage, job, and freedom by the day's end. For my special day, I made sure to dress to impress by choosing a power suit that exuded authority and self-assurance. A professional success that would guarantee my job for many years to come was about to be finalized at today's hospital board meeting. We were working on an expansion project. A tiny, contented smile spread across my face as I applied my cosmetics. Our relationship success had always been measured by Daniel's accomplishments, professional advancements, and social contacts. My strategic planning, financial intelligence, and quiet competence were the real foundation of what we had accomplished, but he had never truly understood this. As his worldly possessions fell to pieces, he would soon discover that lesson the hard way. He was unmovable, as were all of the things that were rightfully mine. A message from Meredith rang my phone. Completed paperwork for submission to court. Everything is set to go as you say. You get to decide when he gets served. I gave the schedule a lot of thought before answering. Hold off until the news about Preston and Blackwell is announced. Full force. Quick and grateful was Meredith's response. In a strategic sense. Got everything ready as planned. With my phone tucked into my purse, I was prepared to face the day and carry out the next step of my meticulously planned strategy. Yesterday, Daniel viewed the locked door as the struggle. He was oblivious to the fact that it was only the prelude to a far larger conflict, which he had already lost. It was just as I had expected the hospital board meeting to go. Completely in agreement. I had worked as chief financial officer on the enlargement project for 18 months, and now I needed approval for it. The hospital's assets were safeguarded and expansion opportunities were maximized by the funding framework that I designed. A professional high, punctuated by the chairman's congrats and the approving nods from my colleagues' executives, stood in stark contrast to the personal anarchy I was carefully navigating. Dr. Abernathy, the chairman of the board, remarked to Claire, "Outstanding work," as we left the meeting room. "We are all still astounded by how accurate your financial estimates are." "Thank you," I said, smiling modestly in response. Predicting potential factors and making preparations appropriately is all that's needed. He has no idea how far-reaching that philosophy is in my personal life as well as my career. I returned to my office to see a text message from Meredith and 3 additional missed calls from Daniel. GNP chose not to be represented following the consultation. D is currently trying to buy out Bowman and Richards. The mid-tier company Richards and Bowman is famous for accepting cases that other firms turn down. Aggressive methods, not legal brilliance, were what made their reputation. They might cause short-term problems, but they would be costly and useless in the long run. Sarah answered quite instantly after I forwarded her this information. Right now, R&B is negotiating 2 large grants for our new cancer with 2 donors. Possible dispute in the middle. May I place a call for you? I turned down the offer of help once more. Permit him to go on. Additional monetary harm, more impulsive choices. Meeting with departments, reviewing their budgets, and finalizing quarterly estimates all took place while I wore my professional mask. At the same time that I was plotting the systematic destruction of my marriage and my husband's meticulously built facade, no one at the hospital would have suspected it. I saw a breaking news alert pop up on my screen at 3:42 p.m. Federal agents searched the offices of Preston and Blackwell. Aerial film showing FBI agents in dark suits entering the shiny downtown headquarters where Daniel had established his career was attached. Right away, Sarah's text message made my phone vibrate. Present moment. Interrogation of 6 senior partners begun. According to Richard, indictments are expected tomorrow. Warrants particularly cited D's department. Before reacting, I gave myself just 5 seconds to think about this new information. We need to move faster on this time frame. Message Meredith. Things were moving along at a rate that not even I could have predicted. Daniel found himself in the middle of a perfect storm as the FBI probe transitioned from a quiet inquiry to public action. Financial resources under examination, personal treachery exposed, professional wrongdoing under investigation, legal recourse decreasing. I communicated with Meredith briefly. Please proceed with filing for a divorce tomorrow morning. Get as much attention as possible from the media. Her reply was just as brief. Papers created. 9 a.m. Filing to maximize the effect on the news cycle. Managing finances in tandem. Announcement made. There was no better time than that. Divorce papers detailing Daniel's adultery, financial misdeeds, and fabricated claims to property ownership would arrive at the same time as the aftermath of the government raid. This is happening as they frantically search for alternative housing and legal counsel. My regular schedule was intact as the workday drew to a close. Going over last emails. Got my workstation all set up for tomorrow. As I was leaving, I exchanged pleasantries with coworkers. Nobody would notice anything out of the ordinary about my schedule or manner. I knew that once word got out about my divorce, a narrative would emerge, so I had to keep things running smoothly. I double-checked the monitoring software for a last time in my automobile. Still at and around Blackwell's offices, according to Daniel's whereabouts. Guess they're either trying to save face with clients or are being interrogated by federal officials. In any case, he was filling the role I had for him. Bewildered, protective, and underdeveloped. I redirected my vehicle away from my temporary abode and toward another location. The dwelling I own. Returning to recover the area that had been momentarily occupied by Daniel and his girlfriend would be my first move after executing my plan. The security detail was alerted to my arrival, and as I neared, they checked my identification. With my key, the new locks opened. This revolutionary biometric data security technology. Crossing the threshold was like taking back some lost ground. Not merely real estate, but also the emotional and mental terrain that Daniel had sought to conquer. Temptation lured. The inside of the house was almost identical to how it had been 3 weeks previously, with some minor adjustments that spoke a lot about the short stay. In the foyer closet hung Vanessa's couture coat. The kitchen counter bore the imprint of an alternate coffee brand. Before they left for the weekend, 2 wine glasses were left in the sink. I meticulously made my way around the rooms, making note of every alteration and encroachment. The closet in the master bedroom held both mine and Vanessa's clothing. Her cut suits and luxury dresses leaned against each other in an unnatural way. I had always been so careful with the organization of her cosmetics that now it was all over my bathroom vanity. The presence of the nightstand on the spot where Daniel had slept was the most telling indicator. The book belonged to a woman, the reading glasses weren't mine, and the hand cream wasn't from the brand I normally use. This wasn't Vanessa's first visit. She was starting the process of settling in, claiming her area, and building permanence. As a temporary workspace, Daniel had turned the guest bedroom into his office. As usual, his desk was outfitted with his laptop docking station, 2 monitors, and stacks of financial data. The antique side table that had belonged to my grandmother had a bottle of his favorite scotch sitting on it, half empty. If the divorce processes ever need it, I have further evidence in the form of photographs that I took of everything. Recuperation was the next step for me. The garments belonging to Vanessa were retrieved from the closet, meticulously folded, and deposited into the high-end baggage that she had abandoned in the room's far corner. We rounded up her personal care items from the restroom, wrapped them in tissue paper, and placed them in the IE luggage. I meticulously removed any evidence of her presence, not out of fury but with the same professional rigor I applied to assessments of hospital budgets. Similarly, Daniel's belongings were handled. Shoes should be matched and kept in their original boxes, cufflinks and watches should be stored in their cases, and business attire should be kept apart from casual wear. Electronic devices were carefully disconnected and packed, and his papers were arranged in chronological order. It was all part of his collection, including his scotch. Everything that Daniel and Vanessa had brought into my house, prepared for their transfer, was already lined up in the foyer, including 8 meticulously packed bags and storage bins. Nothing lost, nothing ruined, and everything in its place. Without taking anything away from them that they could lay claim to, I had eliminated their presence. A printed notice affixed to the baggage completed the ensemble. Personal belongings are prepared for collection. Make an appointment for supervised collection by contacting Harper, Chen & Associates. Anyone caught trying to get into someone else's property without permission will face trespassing charges. My phone rang again with another news alert while I was finishing off this chore. The SEC has suspended Preston and Blackwell Trading due to suspicious activity in their managed accounts. Next to the title, there was a stock photo of the company's top brass from the annual report from the previous year. Standing proudly at the group's periphery in his custom suit, Daniel betrayed no knowledge that the photo would later be used to depict the demise of his business. I sent the notification to Meredith along with a straightforward inquiry. Impact. In terms of schedule, she answered right away. Nothing has changed. Monday filing begins at 9 a.m. The media is already keeping tabs on the judiciary as it pertains to financial crimes. They will report it with enthusiasm since our filing will give them more information. Just right. We would prime the business press. In order to establish a link between Daniel's indiscretion at work and his shortcomings as an individual, it would be easy to compose the story. A senior investment professional is currently facing federal charges related to infidelity in marriage and attempted theft of property. At the same time, his credibility would be ruined in every way imaginable. That night, I slept in my reclaimed house, on beds that I had built just that day and covered with new sheets that I had brought along. I spent my first night back in my own room without fear of an unexpected visitor thanks to the security staff who were stationed outside. There was a frenzy of action as morning came. The time Meredith sent the SMS was 8:45 in the morning. Making my way to the courthouse. This filing is ready to be expedited. Taking care of inquiry. Filing was finalized at 9:12 a.m. No of case has been assigned by the court. I have requested the earliest available slot for my initial hearing. A divorce process server is en route to the offices of Preston and Blackwell at 9:37 a.m. A major development in the current financial inquiry has been brought to the attention of the media. While going about my regular Monday business of visiting with department heads and reviewing financial records, I kept an eye on these events from my office at the hospital. From the outside looking in, I was just the reliable, dedicated CFO who everyone had grown to trust. Unless I wanted to acknowledge my connection to the breaking news story, no one would link me to it. The long-awaited text message from Meredith finally arrived at 11:23 a.m. Notification received. Federal investigators and Dee's co-workers watched as she obtained papers. Optimal results attained. I had a crystal-clear mental image of the setting. While already under investigation by federal officials, Daniel is issued legal papers. The papers disclosed not only the divorce processes but also allegations of adultery, financial mismanagement, and fabricated property claims, which caused his professional mask to collapse. His co-workers saw him lose his cool. The federal agents taking note of his emotional reaction for their records. Several financial news outlets broke the story by lunchtime. Executives from Preston and Blackwell were served with a divorce decree. Documents in the midst of a government search. A diligent journalist had previously made the connection. The director of investments has claimed his wife's property as an asset in their marriage, according to court records. Everyone could see Daniel's personal and professional downfall now. As intended, I have knowledge of his humiliation and have documented it. The phone started ringing non-stop. Numerous calls came in from numbers that Daniel did not provide. The callers seemed to be reporters or people they knew who were interested in the breaking news. I politely denied each one, continuing to attend to hospital business as normal. Sarah quietly entered my office and closed the door behind her shortly after our final scheduled meeting. She stated without elaboration that it is pervasive. The SEC perspective has been covered by every financial news outlet, local stations, and even some national outlets. In the world of business, Daniel's face is ubiquitous. I didn't bat an eye. Is getting in touch with you something he has tried thus far? Sarah noted that there had been 3 calls in the last hour. I remained silent. The wives of hospital staff are not subject to the opinions of the hospital's legal counsel. The board too. An emergency executive session was scheduled for 3 p.m. by Abernathy. They need to know that this won't interfere with the expansion project or the way the hospital runs. Looked at the time again. In order to allay any fears, I will draft a statement. A look of both adoration and anxiety crossed Sarah's face as she regarded me. For someone whose divorce has just made headlines, you're very composed. I responded that this is just the beginning of the process of putting a plan into action after months of planning. So far, everything has gone according to plan. A short and focused hospital board meeting was held. I gave a brief summary of my personal situation, stressing that my assets were completely independent of Daniel's, that the house and all significant possessions were in my name alone, and that my professional obligations and the hospital's financial initiatives would be unaffected by the divorce. I came to the conclusion that, although the timing of these disclosures is bad, they will be useful in the end. Now that we have cleared the air, there are no more uncertainties or worries that could derail our progress. Dr. Abernathy spoke for the whole board when he said that my usual caution in handling the hospital's funds was mirrored in my normal foresight in keeping my own finances apart from Daniel's. 3 major events had transpired by the time I departed from the hospital that night. Daniel was one of 6 executives that were abruptly suspended by Preston and Blackwell. Second, the firm was formally charged by the SEC with securities fraud, market manipulation, and fiduciary negligence. 3. Finally, television cameras caught Daniel as he left the office with a cardboard box containing his personal belongings, a universal sign of an abrupt dismissal. A call came into my phone from an unfamiliar number when I was on my way home. In spite of my better judgment, I responded via the Bluetooth system in the car. Claire, Vanessa's voice, quivering unpredictably in spite of all. It is imperative that we have a conversation. I think your attorney has provided instructions for retrieving your personal items, I responded, using my professional tone consistent with how I would handle a challenging vendor. With a hint of menace in her voice, she declared that this had nothing to do with personal hygiene products. What you're doing to Daniel is the focus of this. Before answering, I let there be a brief pause. In what ways am I harming him? Thoughtful point of view. Your timing is causing him professional destruction, Vanessa went on to say. Divorce paperwork might have been filed at any time. To increase the extent of the harm, you knowingly worked in tandem with the SEC inquiry. An intriguing theory, I conceded, slowing for a red light, though it presumes I have influence over federal regulatory agencies. Stop acting innocent, Vanessa yelled out. I've worked in financial firms long enough to recognize a coordinated attack. You've been planning this for months. And you've been sleeping with my husband for months, I countered, my voice remaining calm. Perhaps longer. You're professional. Insight should have warned you about the risks of associating with someone like Daniel, personally and professionally. Pause then. What do you want? Money. Some sort of revenge. What would it take to end this scorched earth campaign? Light turned green and I accelerated smoothly. I already have what I want, Vanessa, my house, my assets, my reputation intact. Daniel's actions, professional and personal, have consequences. He's experiencing them now. As are you by association. You cold, calculating bitch, she hissed. No, I corrected her. Methodical, strategic, forward-thinking. The qualities Daniel once claimed to value in me before he decided a younger, more compliant companion would better serve his ego. Another pause, longer this time. When Vanessa spoke again, her voice had changed. Less confrontational, more calculating. What if I have information? Things Daniel told me about your finances, about the hospital's dealings. Things that might interest certain investigators. Ah, there it was, the threat beneath the anger. I smiled slightly, though she couldn't see it. That would be ill-advised for 2 reasons, I replied. First, any financial insights Daniel shared with you were likely fabrications designed to impress you with his non-existent acumen. And second, false allegations to regulatory agencies are themselves prosecutable offenses, as I'm sure you're aware from your extensive experience in financial firms. I could almost hear her recalculating, trying to find leverage that didn't exist. Retrieval of your personal items can be arranged for tomorrow between 2 and 4 p.m., I continued. A representative from Harper, Chan and Associates will be present to supervise and document the process. If that time frame doesn't work for you, alternative arrangements can be discussed with my attorney. Good evening, Vanessa. I ended the call. Before she could respond, satisfied that another potential complication had been neutralized. Vanessa might be angry, but she was also strategic enough to recognize a losing position when she found herself in one. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Sarah's car already parked by the curb. She was waiting on the front steps, holding a bottle of champagne and wearing an expression that mixed concern with celebration. I thought you might need company tonight, she explained as I approached. The news coverage is intensifying. They've connected the divorce filing to the SEC investigation, and they're digging into Daniel's background, previous relationships, everything. I unlocked the door, disarming the security system with my fingerprint. Was that your doing? I asked, genuinely curious about the accelerated media interest. Sarah shook her head as we entered. This is pure journalistic feeding frenzy. Financial scandal plus personal betrayal equals ratings gold. They're running with it without any encouragement needed. In the kitchen, I gathered glasses while Sarah opened the champagne. The quiet domesticity of the moment contrasted sharply with the public storm surrounding Daniel's downfall. Have you seen the footage? Sarah asked, pouring the champagne. Daniel being escorted from the building. It's all over the business channels. I shook my head. I've been focused on hospital matters. Sarah pulled out her tablet and navigated to a news site. The video played automatically. Daniel emerging from the Preston and Blackwell building, jacket collar turned up against the cameras. Ignoring reporters shouted questions as he hurried toward a waiting taxi. His face was ashen, his normally perfect appearance disheveled. The cardboard box in his arms contained framed photos, a trophy from some investment competition, and what appeared to be his prized limited edition fountain pen collection. They're saying he's facing potential criminal charges, Sarah commented, accepting the glass I offered her. Securities fraud, wire fraud, possibly even RICO implications if they can prove he knew about the larger scheme. And his attorney prospects? I asked, dwindling by the hour. 3 more firms have declined to represent him since this morning. Apparently, no one wants to be associated with what they're calling the Preston and Blackwell Six. I raised my glass in a small toast. To consequences. Sarah clinked her glass against mine to meticulous planning. We settled in the living room, the house now fully reclaimed as my own space. Daniel and Vanessa's personal items were neatly packed and waiting in the foyer, a visual representation of their ejection from my life. Vanessa called me on my way home. I mentioned casually. She attempted to threaten me with supposed financial information Daniel shared with her. Sarah sat up straighter. That's concerning. What specifically? Nothing substantive, I assured her. A desperate attempt to gain leverage. I reminded her that fabricating allegations to regulatory agencies carries its own legal risks. Still, Sarah said, her legal mind already assessing potential threats. We should document the call. It could constitute attempted extortion depending on the precise wording she used. I nodded in agreement. I'll have the car's call recording system download the audio file. Meredith should have it for her records. As the evening progressed, we discussed next steps. The initial divorce hearing scheduled for the following week. The media strategy for addressing inevitable questions. The security measures still in place to prevent any unauthorized visits. From Daniel. Around 8 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This isn't over. You have no idea what's coming. DI showed the message to Sarah, who immediately took a screenshot. Documented threat. I'll forward it to Meredith and the security team. He's desperate. I observed his professional reputation destroyed his personal life, exposed his financial resources dwindling. Desperation leads to mistakes. Which is exactly what we anticipated. Sarah nodded. Each reckless action or threat simply strengthens your position. By the time Sarah left, we had refined the strategy for the coming days. Maintaining my professional composure at the hospital. Documenting any contact attempts from Daniel or Vanessa. Proceeding methodically with the divorce filing while the Preston and Blackwell investigation unfolded in parallel. Alone in my reclaimed house, I conducted one final walkthrough before retiring for the night. Every room now restored to my preferred order. Every intrusion removed. Every space reclaimed. The physical manifestation of the larger reclamation taking place in my life. As I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed with a final update from Meredith. Court date confirmed for next Monday. Judge Crawford assigned as anticipated. D has secured representation from Westmoreland Group. Final firm willing to take his case. Limited resources. Questionable strategy. I responded with a simple acknowledgement. Then set my phone aside. Everything continued to unfold according to plan. Daniel scrambling to secure subpar legal representation. The divorce proceedings advancing on our preferred timeline. The media connecting all the unsavory elements of his professional and personal conduct. Tomorrow would bring new developments, new challenges to navigate. But tonight I would sleep peacefully in my own bed. In my own home, secure in the knowledge that Daniel's belated education about property deeds, financial independence, and the consequences of betrayal was proceeding exactly as designed. Morning arrived with new developments. Some expected, some surprising in their timing but not their substance. The first notification came from the security team. D attempted property access at 6:17 a.m. Appeared intoxicated. Verbal confrontation with security personnel. Departed when police were mentioned. Full report and video forthcoming. The second was a news alert. Preston and Blackwell managing director charged in federal probe. 6 others named as co-conspirators. Daniel's name appeared fourth on the list of those charged. The third was from Meredith. Emergency motion filed by D's new counsel requesting immediate access to marital property and assets. Hearing scheduled for 2 p.m. today. Your presence requested but not required. Sarah called as I was reviewing these updates. Have you seen the morning news? They're calling it the biggest financial fraud case since Madoff. Daniel's facing up to 30 years if convicted on all counts. I've seen it. Confirmed. Already mentally adjusting my schedule to accommodate the unexpected court hearing. More pressing is his attorney's emergency motion this afternoon. Standard desperate tactics, Sarah assessed. They'll claim he needs access to marital property for documents relevant to his defense. Judge Crawford won't be sympathetic, especially given the property deed and his documented infidelity. I'll attend nonetheless, I decided. Better to appear reasonable and cooperative with the court, even as we maintain our position. The morning proceeded with careful coordination. Rescheduling hospital meetings. Briefing Meredith on the latest developments. Reviewing security footage of Daniel's early morning attempt to access the property. The video was particularly illuminating. Daniel clearly intoxicated, arguing with a security personnel stationed discreetly in an unmarked car near the property. His appearance was shocking, unshaven, wearing what appeared to be the same clothes from yesterday, his normally perfect hair disheveled. The transformation from polished investment executive to desperate intoxicated trespasser had occurred in less than 24 hours. More telling was his behavior. The wild gesticulations, the finger-pointing, the visible rage. At one point, he actually attempted to push past the security officer, only backing down when informed that police would be called immediately if he took one more step toward the house. I forwarded the video to Meredith with a note. Additional evidence of erratic behavior for this afternoon's hearing. Her response was immediate. Perfect timing. We'll incorporate into our response to emergency motion. By 1:30 p.m., I was seated beside Meredith in the county courthouse, reviewing our strategy for the emergency hearing. Daniel had not yet arrived, though his newly retained counsel, a junior partner from the Westmoreland Group, was frantically organizing documents at the opposite table. They're going to argue he needs immediate access to financial records stored at the house, Meredith explained quietly, records supposedly crucial to his defense in the federal case, records that don't exist. I noted all our financial documentation is either with our accountant or in my secure cloud storage. Meredith nodded. Exactly. But they're desperate for any foothold, any excuse to get him back into the house where he might claim partial residence rights. At 1:52 p.m., Daniel finally appeared, escorted by a different attorney than the one preparing at the defense table. This second lawyer appeared to be briefing him rapidly as they approached, likely explaining procedures and limitations. The transformation in Daniel's appearance was stark, even from yesterday's news footage. His bespoke suit hung awkwardly as if he'd lost weight overnight. Dark circles underlined his eyes, and his normally perfect grooming had given way to stubble and visible disarray. When he noticed me, he froze momentarily, his expression cycling rapidly through surprise, anger and something approaching fear before settling into forced composure. The younger attorney guided him to their table, whispering urgently as Daniel continued staring in my direction. I maintained a neutral expression, meeting his gaze briefly before returning my attention to the documents Meredith was reviewing. The message was clear. I was composed, prepared and completely unmoved by his presence. Judge Crawford entered precisely at 2 p.m. and the bailiff called the court to order. The proceedings began with Daniel's counsel presenting their emergency motion, arguing that critical financial documents needed for his federal defense were located in the marital home, and that my sudden and unexplained reclaiming of the property constituted an attempt to withhold evidence relevant to his case. Meredith listened patiently, making occasional notes but otherwise displaying complete confidence in our position. When it was her turn to respond, she approached the bench with measured steps. Your Honor, we're prepared to address each claim individually, but first let me clarify several fundamental misrepresentations in opposing counsel's motion. She proceeded to systematically dismantle their arguments, presenting the property deed showing my sole ownership, documentation of Daniel's infidelity, including his moving another woman into my house, evidence that all relevant financial records were either with our accountant or in secure digital storage accessible to both parties, and finally, the security footage from that morning showing Daniel's intoxicated attempt to access the property. Proceeding methodically with the divorce filing while the Preston and Blackwell investigation unfolded in parallel. Alone in my reclaimed house, I conducted one final walkthrough before retiring for the night. Every room now restored to my preferred order. Every intrusion removed. Every space reclaimed. The physical manifestation of the larger reclamation taking place in my life. As I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed with a final update from Meredith. Court date confirmed for next Monday. Judge Crawford assigned as anticipated. D has secured representation from Westmoreland Group. Final firm willing to take his case. Limited resources. Questionable strategy. I responded with a simple acknowledgement, then set my phone aside. Everything continued to unfold according to plan. Daniel scrambling to secure subpar legal representation. The divorce proceedings advancing on our preferred timeline. The media connecting all the unsavory elements of his professional and personal conduct. Tomorrow would bring new developments, new challenges to navigate. But tonight I would sleep peacefully in my own bed. In my own home, secure in the knowledge that Daniel's belated education about property deeds, financial independence, and the consequences of betrayal was proceeding exactly as designed. Morning arrived with new developments. Some expected, some surprising in their timing but not their substance. The first notification came from the security team. D attempted property access at 6:17 a.m. Appeared intoxicated. Verbal confrontation with security personnel. Departed when police were mentioned. Full report and video forthcoming. The second was a news alert. Preston and Blackwell managing director charged in federal probe. 6 others named as co-conspirators. Daniel's name appeared fourth on the list of those charged. The third was from Meredith. Emergency motion filed by D's new counsel requesting immediate access to marital property and assets. Hearing scheduled for 2 p.m. today. Your presence requested but not required. Sarah called as I was reviewing these updates. Have you seen the morning news? They're calling it the biggest financial fraud case since Madoff. Daniel's facing up to 30 years if convicted on all counts. Seen it. Confirmed. Already mentally adjusting my schedule to accommodate the unexpected court hearing. More pressing is his attorney's emergency motion this afternoon. Standard desperate tactics, Sarah assessed. They'll claim he needs access to marital property for documents relevant to his defense. Judge Crawford won't be sympathetic, especially given the property deed and his documented infidelity. I'll attend nonetheless, I decided. Better to appear reasonable and cooperative with the court, even as we maintain our position. The morning proceeded with careful coordination. Rescheduling hospital meetings. Briefing Meredith on the latest developments. Reviewing security footage of Daniel's early morning attempt to access the property. The video was particularly illuminating. Daniel clearly intoxicated, arguing with a security personnel stationed discreetly in an unmarked car near the property. His appearance was shocking, unshaven, wearing what appeared to be the same clothes from yesterday. His normally perfect hair disheveled. The transformation from polished investment executive to desperate intoxicated trespasser had occurred in less than 24 hours. More telling was his behavior. The wild gesticulations, the finger-pointing, the visible rage. At one point, he actually attempted to push past the security officer, only backing down when informed that police would be called immediately if he took one more step toward the house. I forwarded the video to Meredith with a note. Additional evidence of erratic behavior for this afternoon's hearing. Her response was immediate. Perfect timing. We'll incorporate into our response to emergency motion. By 1:30 p.m., I was seated beside Meredith in the county courthouse, reviewing our strategy for the emergency hearing. Daniel had not yet arrived, though his newly retained counsel, a junior partner from the Westmoreland Group, was frantically organizing documents at the opposite table. They're going to argue he needs immediate access to financial records stored at the house. Meredith explained quietly, records supposedly crucial to his defense in the federal case, records that don't exist. I noted all our financial documentation is either with our accountant or in my secure cloud storage. Meredith nodded. Exactly. But they're desperate for any foothold, any excuse to get him back into the house where he might claim partial residence rights. At 1:52 p.m., Daniel finally appeared, escorted by a different attorney than the one preparing at the defense table. This second lawyer appeared to be briefing him rapidly as they approached, likely explaining procedures and limitations. The transformation in Daniel's appearance was stark, even from yesterday's news footage. His bespoke suit hung awkwardly as if he'd lost weight overnight. Dark circles underlined his eyes, and his normally perfect grooming had given way to stubble and visible disarray. When he noticed me, he froze momentarily, his expression cycling rapidly through surprise, anger and something approaching fear before settling into forced composure. The younger attorney guided him to their table, whispering urgently as Daniel continued staring in my direction. I maintained a neutral expression, meeting his gaze briefly before returning my attention to the documents Meredith was reviewing. The message was clear. I was composed, prepared and completely unmoved by his presence. Judge Crawford entered precisely at 2 p.m. and the bailiff called the court to order. The proceedings began with Daniel's counsel presenting their emergency motion, arguing that critical financial documents needed for his federal defense were located in the marital home, and that my sudden and unexplained reclaiming of the property constituted an attempt to withhold evidence relevant to his case. Meredith listened patiently, making occasional notes but otherwise displaying complete confidence in our position. When it was her turn to respond, she approached the bench with measured steps. Your Honor, we're prepared to address each claim individually, but first let me clarify several fundamental misrepresentations in opposing counsel's motion. She proceeded to systematically dismantle their arguments, presenting the property deed showing my sole ownership, documentation of Daniel's infidelity, including his moving another woman into my house, evidence that all relevant financial records were either with our accountant or in secure digital storage accessible to both parties, and finally, the security footage from that morning showing Daniel's intoxicated attempt to access the property. Far from withholding evidence, Meredith concluded, my client has simply secured her legal property from unauthorized access after documented intrusion. Mr. Keller's professional difficulties are entirely separate from this divorce proceeding, though his attempts to conflate them suggest a concerning pattern of misrepresentation. Judge Crawford, known for her no-nonsense approach, addressed Daniel's attorneys directly. Counselors, is there any evidence that documents exclusively related to Mr. Keller's federal case, not marital finances, not personal records, but specifically his defense against federal charges, are physically located in this property and nowhere else? The junior attorney glanced nervously at his senior colleague before responding. Your Honor, Mr. Keller believes certain documents and electronic records are stored there that would be beneficial to his defense. That wasn't my question, Judge. Crawford noted dryly. I asked for evidence that crucial defense materials exist exclusively in that location. We don't have specific inventory, Your Honor, but... Motion denied. Judge Crawford interrupted. The property is clearly in Ms. Keller's name only. Mr. Keller's unauthorized use of it to house his paramour, followed by his documented intoxicated attempt to access it this morning, demonstrates precisely why supervised access is appropriate. She turned to Meredith. Ms. Harper, your client has already arranged for the organized retrieval of Mr. Keller's personal belongings, correct? Yes, Your Honor. All personal items have been carefully packed and are available for supervised retrieval at scheduled times. Then that arrangement shall continue, Judge Crawford ruled. Mr. Keller may schedule supervised access to retrieve his belongings, but he may not reside in or freely access the property. Furthermore, this court will not entertain additional emergency motions without substantive new evidence. With a final bang of her gavel, the hearing concluded, a complete victory for our position. Daniel sat stunned at the defense table while his attorneys whispered urgently, likely explaining the implications of the ruling and attempting to develop an alternative strategy. As Meredith and I gathered our materials to leave, Daniel suddenly stood and approached our table, ignoring his attorney's attempts to restrain him. Claire, he said, his voice pitched low but intense. We need to talk. This has gone far enough. You've made your point. Meredith immediately stepped between us. Mr. Keller, all communication should be through counsel. I suggest you return to your attorneys. This is between me and my wife, Daniel insisted, attempting to move around Meredith. Ex-wife, I corrected him calmly, meeting his gaze directly. And Meredith is right. We have nothing to discuss outside of legal proceedings. Something in Daniel's expression shifted, the facade of control cracking to reveal the desperation beneath. You don't understand what you're doing, he hissed. The damage you're causing to me, to my career, to my life. I understand exactly what I'm doing, I replied, maintaining the same calm tone. Just as you understood exactly what you were doing when you moved your girlfriend into my house. When you depleted our joint accounts, when you lied about your firm's activities. His face flushed with anger. You self-righteous. Mr. Keller, Judge Crawford's voice cut through the tension. She was still at the bench, observing the exchange. "I strongly advise you to step away and allow Ms. Keller and her counsel to depart. Any further attempts at unauthorized communication will be noted in the court record." Daniel's attorneys finally managed to pull him back, whispering urgently, as they guided him toward the exit. The defeated slump of his shoulders contrasted sharply with his attempted intimidation moments earlier, a visual representation of his rapidly diminishing power. "As Meredith and I left the courthouse through a side entrance to avoid potential media," she remarked, "his behavior today only strengthens our case. Approaching you like that, attempting intimidation in front of the judge, it's the kind of impulsive action that destroys credibility." "It's also predictable," I noted. "Daniel has always reacted poorly to losing control. The more pressure applied, the more erratic his behavior becomes." "Which is exactly why your strategy has been so effective," Meredith acknowledged. "Each loss compounds the next, increasing his desperation, leading to further missteps." Back in my car, I checked my phone to find multiple updates waiting. The federal charges against Preston and Blackwell had expanded to include potential criminal conspiracy. Daniel's assets had been frozen as part of the investigation, and most significantly, a reporter had uncovered Vanessa's employment history at another firm previously investigated for similar violations. The narrative was evolving exactly as anticipated. Daniel's professional misconduct and personal betrayal merging into a single story of spectacular downfall. And I had orchestrated every aspect of it, from the timing of my disappearance to the reclaiming of my house, from the divorce filing to the court appearances. As I drove away from the courthouse, I allowed myself a small, satisfied smile. Daniel had always underestimated me, my intelligence, my foresight, my capacity for strategic patience. Now he was learning the true cost of that miscalculation, one devastating revelation at a time. The next 2 weeks unfolded with the precision of a meticulously choreographed performance. Each day brought new developments in Daniel's professional and personal collapse, while I maintained my carefully crafted equilibrium. By Thursday morning, 7 days after the initial court hearing, the Preston and Blackwell scandal had expanded beyond anyone's initial projections. 3 senior partners had accepted plea deals in exchange for testimony against the others. The SEC had frozen all executive assets pending further investigation, and Daniel's name appeared prominently in every article about the firm's fraudulent activities. "They're calling it a classic Ponzi scheme with a modern twist," Sarah explained during our weekly lunch, "using client funds to cover trading losses, falsifying returns, creating shell accounts to hide the money flow. The federal prosecutor is comparing it to Madoff's operation, just on a smaller scale." I sipped my sparkling water, absorbing this information with practiced composure. And Daniel's specific involvement. According to the latest filings, he personally managed several of the fraudulent accounts. They have documentation showing he knew about the discrepancies for at least 18 months, coincidentally, around the time he began his affair with Vanessa. That timing wasn't coincidental, of course. Financial pressure and personal betrayal often moved in tandem, each feeding the other in a downward spiral of increasingly poor decisions. "Speaking of Vanessa," Sarah continued, lowering her voice though we were seated in a private corner of the restaurant. "Did you see this morning's business section? They've connected her to 3 different firms that faced regulatory action, always as an executive assistant to a director later charged with financial improprieties, always departing just before investigations became public. I hadn't seen the article, but the pattern aligned with my own research into Vanessa's employment history. They're suggesting she was somehow involved in the schemes." Sarah shrugged. "Nothing that direct yet, but they're certainly implying she has a habit of forming relationships with executives engaged in questionable practices. Whether she's an accomplice or simply has terrible judgment in men remains unclear. The distinction wouldn't matter much for Vanessa's future employment prospects. Association with multiple financial scandals effectively ended careers in the investment world, regardless of personal culpability. My phone buzzed with a text from Meredith. "Dee's attorney requesting settlement. Conference." Apparently, Federal counsel advised resolving divorce quickly to focus on criminal defense. This development was earlier than anticipated, but not unwelcome. Daniel's legal resources were stretched thin between the criminal charges and divorce proceedings. Settling the latter would allow him to concentrate on the former, a practical decision his attorneys had likely been pushing for days. I responded simply, "What terms are they proposing?" Meredith's reply came moments later. "None yet. Floating the concept only. Shall I schedule preliminary discussion?" After brief consideration, I texted back, "Proceed, but maintain all current positions on property and assets." The strategic advantages of a settlement were considerable. A negotiated agreement would avoid protracted court battles, prevent any unexpected judicial rulings, and most importantly, provide a clean, definitive end to my connection with Daniel. The criminal proceedings against him might drag on for years, but our divorce could be finalized and behind me in a matter of weeks. "Good news?" Sarah asked, noting my slight smile. "Potentially. Daniel's counsel is requesting settlement discussions." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "That was faster than we projected. His resources must be even more limited than we thought." "The federal case takes precedence," I noted. "His attorneys are likely advising him to simplify where possible." "And will you agree to settlement talks?" "Course. A clean resolution benefits me as much as him, provided the terms reflect reality. Reality being that I owned the house outright, that my financial assets were properly segregated from his, and that his infidelity and financial misconduct had been thoroughly documented. Any reasonable settlement would acknowledge these facts rather than contest them." As lunch concluded, I received another text from Meredith. "Meeting scheduled for tomorrow, 10 a.m. Dee will not attend personally. Counsel only." Perfect. Negotiating with attorneys rather than Daniel directly would keep emotions removed from the proceedings, allowing for more efficient resolution. The fact that Daniel wouldn't be present suggested his lawyers had recognized his volatility as a liability in negotiations. The rest of the day proceeded according to my carefully maintained schedule. Hospital budget meetings, review of the expansion project timelines, routine administrative tasks that anchored my professional identity regardless of personal circumstances. By evening, another significant development had emerged. The business press had uncovered connections between specific fraudulent accounts at Preston and Blackwell and offshore entities linked to Daniel personally. The implications were damning. Not just professional misconduct within the firm, but potential personal enrichment through deliberately deceptive practices. Meredith called as I was reviewing these reports. "Have you seen the latest?" "Just reading." "Now," I confirmed. "This changes our settlement approach," she noted. "If these offshore accounts are verified, they would constitute hidden assets subject to discovery and divorce proceedings. Unless we agree not to pursue them as part of a settlement," I pointed out. Meredith paused, then chuckled softly. "And this is why you're my favorite client." "Yes, exactly. We now have additional leverage for tomorrow's discussion. How would you suggest we proceed?" "Let them make the initial offer," Meredith advised. "I suspect it will be surprisingly generous given these new revelations. They'll want to avoid any additional financial scrutiny from our forensic accountants, which could potentially uncover evidence relevant to the criminal case." The strategy was sound. By allowing Daniel's counsel to establish initial terms, we would gain insight into what they were most concerned about protecting or concealing. That information itself had value beyond any specific dollar amount they might propose. The settlement conference the following morning validated this approach entirely. Daniel's attorneys, now expanded to include a specialist in white-collar criminal defense, proposed terms that were indeed surprisingly favorable. They conceded full ownership of the house, which was already legally mine, acknowledged the separation of financial assets, and even offered a substantial cash settlement to expedite proceedings and provide closure for both parties. This last element was particularly telling. Daniel had no legal obligation to provide additional funds beyond returning any marital assets he might have appropriated. A voluntary cash settlement suggested strongly that his legal team feared what further financial investigation might uncover. Meredith received their proposal with professional neutrality, promising to review the terms with me and respond within 48 hours. As soon as we were alone in her office, however, her poker face gave way to a satisfied smile. "They're terrified of financial discovery," she observed, highlighting specific clauses in the agreement. These waivers of further accounting, the expedited timeline, the non-disclosure provisions, all designed to prevent our forensic accountants from examining his finances further. I reviewed the document carefully, noting the generous terms alongside the restrictive clauses. The cash settlement is significantly higher than we anticipated. "Blood money," Meredith said bluntly. "They're hoping you'll take it and walk away, without asking questions about where it came from or what else might be hidden." And if we countered by demanding full financial disclosure instead of accepting the settlement? Meredith leaned back in her chair, considering it would delay the divorce proceedings potentially by months. Any information we uncovered would likely be shared with federal prosecutors through discovery requirements. Daniel's criminal exposure would increase significantly. I weighed these options carefully. The settlement offered immediate closure and substantial financial compensation. Further investigation promised potential satisfaction in seeing Daniel face additional consequences, but at the cost of prolonging my own connection to him and his misdeeds. Draft a counteroffer, I decided. Accept the general framework but increase the settlement amount by 30%. Add provisions for retrieval of any remaining personal items from the house and include strict non-contact requirements going forward. Meredith nodded approvingly. "They'll accept. The additional amount is significant but not prohibitive, and the non-contact provisions benefit Daniel as much as you at this point." She was right. By that evening, Daniel's counsel had agreed to our counteroffer with minimal negotiation. The final settlement included the increased financial compensation, comprehensive non-contact provisions, and an expedited timeline for finalizing all documentation. The divorce would be complete within 10 days, assuming the judge approved the settlement terms, which Meredith assured me was virtually certain given the circumstances and Judge Crawford's previous rulings. As I left Meredith's office that evening, a notification appeared on my phone. A news alert with Daniel's name in. The headline, "Preston and Blackwell executive released on $2 million bail. Passport surrendered." The attached article included a courthouse photograph of Daniel leaving his bail hearing. The transformation was shocking even to me. In just 2 weeks he had aged a decade. The polished, confident investment director had been replaced by a haggard, defeated figure in an ill-fitting suit. Photographers captured him shielding his face from cameras, shoulders hunched, escorted by grim-faced attorneys on either side. Most telling was the complete absence of Vanessa in any recent coverage. According to Sarah's sources, she had left the city 3 days ago, her destination unknown. Whether she had abandoned Daniel to his fate or been advised to distance herself from the case remained unclear. Either way, his personal and professional support systems had evaporated simultaneously. The following week passed in a blur of paperwork, signatures, and final arrangements. The divorce settlement was submitted to the court, reviewed by Judge Crawford, and approved with remarkable efficiency. Daniel's attorneys pushed for immediate processing, likely under instruction to resolve the divorce before additional criminal charges might complicate matters further. On a crisp Tuesday morning, Meredith called with the news I had been waiting for. "It's done. The judge signed the final decree this morning. You are officially divorced." The words landed with surprising gentleness, not the dramatic climax one might expect after months of strategic planning, but rather the quiet conclusion of a necessary business transaction. "Thank you," I said simply, "for everything." "My pleasure," Meredith replied, professional but warm. "The final settlement has been transferred to your account. The deed to the house has been re-registered with additional notations confirming sole ownership. All legal notifications have been sent to relevant parties. And the non-contact provisions. In full effect immediately. Any attempt by Daniel to contact you directly would constitute violation of a court order, potentially resulting in additional legal consequences. Another loose end neatly tied. Daniel would not be appearing on my doorstep or calling my phone in desperate attempts to negotiate or manipulate. The legal barriers were now as firm as the emotional ones I had constructed months ago. That evening, Sarah arrived at my house with an expensive bottle of champagne and a small, elegantly wrapped package. To commemorate the occasion, she explained as I welcomed her inside. We settled in the living room, now redecorated to my personal preferences, rather than the compromised style that had characterized my marriage to Daniel. The new furniture, artwork, and color scheme reflected my aesthetic completely. No concessions, no accommodations for anyone else's taste. Sarah raised her glass and a toast to new beginnings, clean breaks, and bulletproof property deeds. Smiled, clinking my glass against hers. And to thorough preparation. Open your gift, she urged after we had each sipped the excellent champagne. The small package contained a beautiful silver paperweight, elegantly engraved with a single word. Prevail. Seemed fitting, Sarah explained. Not just surviving but prevailing. Coming through stronger than before. I turned the paperweight in my hand, appreciating both the sentiment and the craftsmanship. It's perfect. Thank you. As we enjoyed the champagne, Sarah updated me on the latest developments in Daniel's case. 3 more executives had accepted plea deals, each implicating him in increasingly serious violations. His bail conditions had been tightened after prosecutors expressed concern about potential flight risk, and the offshore accounts connected to him were now under scrutiny by international financial crime units. They're projecting a minimum 10-year sentence if he's convicted on all counts, Sarah noted, possibly more depending on what the offshore investigation uncovers. I absorbed this information with the same cool detachment I'd maintained throughout the process. Daniel's fate was no longer connected to mine in any way. His choices had led him to this point, just as my choices had led me to mine. And professionally? Sarah asked, changing the subject. The hospital board remained supportive. More than supportive, I confirmed. The expansion project is proceeding ahead of schedule. My quarterly performance review was exemplary, and Dr. Abernathy has hinted at potential advancement opportunities in the coming year. My professional success continued uninterrupted, perhaps even enhanced by the contrast between my composed handling of personal challenges and Daniel's spectacular implosion. Where his career lay in ruins, mine continued its steady upward trajectory, built on the solid foundation of competence rather than deception. After Sarah departed, I moved through my reclaimed home with a sense of peaceful completion. Each room now reflected only my preferences, my choices, my vision. No traces of Daniel remained. All his belongings had been removed. All evidence of his temporary occupation erased. In my home office, I opened the secure file I had maintained throughout. This process, a detailed documentation of Daniel's betrayal, my strategic response, and the ultimate resolution. The final entry would be made tonight, closing this chapter permanently. As I typed the concluding notes, a news alert appeared on my computer screen. Federal prosecutors expand Preston and Blackwell case. New evidence suggests international money laundering. Daniel's world continued to collapse, the consequences of his actions multiplying beyond even my careful projections. But that story was no longer connected to mine. I had extricated myself completely, protecting what was mine while allowing him to face the natural repercussions of his choices. I completed my final entry, saved the file, and closed the document. Then I activated the secure deletion protocol we had established months ago, systematically removing all traces of my documentation from any potentially discoverable source. The record of my strategy existed now only in encrypted backups accessible solely to me, insurance against any future attempts to rewrite this history. 1 year later, I stood at the window of my executive office on the top floor of the hospital's new wing, the expansion project I had spearheaded now completed ahead of schedule and under budget. My promotion to Chief Executive Officer had been announced the previous month, culminating years of strategic career advancement. The morning's business news had included a small item about Daniel's sentencing, 15 years in federal prison, forfeiture of all assets, and restitution payments that would extend well beyond his release. Vanessa had reportedly testified against him as part of her own immunity agreement, revealing that their relationship had begun not as a romantic connection, but as a strategic partnership to conceal financial misconduct. I felt no satisfaction in this news, no vindictive pleasure in Daniel's downfall. Those emotions had burned away long ago, replaced by the cool clarity that had guided me through each phase of my response to his betrayal. What remained was simply recognition of natural consequences. His actions had produced precisely the results that should have been expected. My assistant knocked lightly on the open door. "Your 10 o'clock is here, Ms. Keller, the investment committee for the new oncology center." "Thank you, Jennifer. I'll be right there." I gathered my presentation materials and took one last look at the view from my window. The city spread out below, opportunities extending in every direction. My house remained my sanctuary, my career continued its ascent, and my life proceeded on the path I had carefully constructed. Daniel had moved his girlfriend into my house, never bothering to read the deed that would have revealed his vulnerability. That single act of carelessness, born of arrogance, entitlement, and underestimation, had set in motion the complete dismantling of his carefully constructed facade. I closed my office door and headed toward the conference room, my steps measured and confident. The past was properly archived, its lessons incorporated, but its hold released. Ahead lay possibilities limited only by my vision and determination, a future built on the solid foundation of knowing exactly what I owned, what I was worth, and what I was capable of achieving. Daniel had learned those facts too late. I had known them all along. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.